Time now for another episode of How Is This a Thing? And we begin with this article, which I personally found pretty bone-chilling, actually. This is from theage.com.au from Australia, written by Raf Sekone, who is a politician for the Australian Labor Party. New COVID-19 restrictions will be needed for anti-vaxxers. Told you, I knew that we were going to start hearing this kind of thing. Not getting vaxxed will result in restrictions being placed on your life, apparently. I'll skip ahead to the third paragraph. Thankfully, the possibility of a vaccine for this virus is looking more plausible. Unfortunately, like a diabolical plot twist, the day the vaccine arrives, so too will the inevitable chorus of those who object to being vaccinated. But unlike hapless movie heroes, we can be prepared for this. To anti-vaxxers, I have one message. Our tolerance for your willful ignorance is over. We cannot afford morally or economically to give any ground to those who choose not to be vaccinated against COVID-19. You know, that last line reminded me of what Yuri Bezmenov once said about when a society has become so completely subverted and divided that there's no longer a compromise between the left and the right anymore. It's the you're either with us or against us mentality. Let me be clear, I'm not advocating that we vaccinate people against their will. That would be wrong. Yeah, that would be wrong. So instead, we'll just make it so that not getting vaccinated will make your life practically a living hell, because that's apparently not wrong. We must ensure that the safety of our community is the number one priority. So group rights over individual rights. That means that participation in everyday life cannot put others at risk, because now it's just presumed by default that people who are not vaccinated are somehow a risk to other people, right? So the presumption of innocence is gone. If you do not want to be vaccinated against COVID-19, you ought to bear the consequences of that decision. As a community, we should consider to what extent we allow organizations to prevent those who object to being vaccinated against COVID-19 to enter their premises, participate in their activities, and in some circumstances, seek their employment. So in other words, if you refuse, you will become a pariah, and you'll be ostracized from society.
Freedom is irrelevant. Self-determination is irrelevant. You must comply.
You're not allowed to question the efficacy or safety of the vaccine. Just obey, or else you may not be allowed to participate in things like entering a premises or having a job. Governments have gone some way to doing this by implementing policies such as withholding family tax benefits and preventing children from being accepted into childcare unless vaccinations are proven. Further restrictions would be a natural extension of these policies. Yes, I could see things like you won't be allowed to claim social welfare unless you're vaccinated. This is truly a human rights issue. We're talking about the devaluing of a certain group of people in our society, the marginalizing of people who refuse to be vaccinated against a disease that has largely gone at this point, is no more fatal than a seasonal influenza, and the vaccine will be no more effective than a flu shot. Once enough people achieve herd immunity, either through developing antibodies by having had the virus or through a vaccine, for example, why would the people who've been vaccinated even care that other people haven't been vaccinated? You can't catch the same virus twice. If the virus mutates, that's a different virus, in the same way that we get a new mutation of the flu virus every year. So you can't develop a complete and all-encompassing vaccine for the coronavirus, as there's always going to be another mutation of a coronavirus coming along. You can't cure it any more than you can cure the common cold. But there are preventative treatments, which we've discussed before. People can start by working on improving their immune systems. Restaurants could be allowed the right to refuse entry to those who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. Businesses, especially those involved in the care or service of vulnerable communities, might be allowed the right to refuse employment to those without a COVID-19 vaccination. Organisers of mass gatherings could deny the sale of tickets on this basis. So this kind of thing might very well lead to the kinds of excuses that the left makes for big tech censorship. They claim when content or a content creator is banned from their platform that it's fine because they're a private company, they can do what they want. And I expect that if we end up with a scenario where restaurants and other such public-facing businesses deny non-vaccinated people entry, that the left will also use the private company argument. This is despite the fact that in this hypothetical scenario, a private company would be pressured by the government to comply with these guidelines. And I'd imagine scenarios where businesses will also be pressured into complying because insurance companies will say that they can't provide cover if some of the customers in their building aren't vaccinated. As I've discussed before, proof of vaccination will likely be supplied by the various health and digital immunity passport apps currently being developed. Again, this whole situation is clearly not about a vaccine, and it's not about a virus, it's about control. Because, as I've already said, if a sufficient number of people were vaccinated and the vaccine were genuine, then those people wouldn't have to worry about the non-vaccinated people in society, because they wouldn't be able to catch the virus from them, as the vaccine would make them no longer susceptible to it. Anyway, whatever happened to my body, my choice? It seems the left only believes in that argument when it applies to killing unborn babies. But apparently it doesn't apply when technocrats are desperate to get the entire populace of the planet to take their vaccine. It sure makes you wonder, what the hell is in the bloody thing, right? No doubt there would be logistical issues to overcome. However, the health and safety of our population should be any government's primary concern, and the infrastructure to implement these changes exists. We already have an Australian immunisation register in place that tracks a child's vaccination history. We could expand this program to track what would be the most important vaccination of this century to the population, until, of course, the next required vaccination. There are those who, for medical reasons, cannot receive vaccinations and would rightly receive an exemption. There are already government guidelines in place that would allow for this to occur. For the rest who claim they are conscientious objectors, the excuses don't stack up anymore. There is too much at stake. Ah yes, the "there's too much at stake" argument. You can always use that to justify any kind of tyranny. I know after writing this, my office will be inundated with correspondence from anti-vaccination activists demanding to be heard. For those of you who do contact me, know this: I have no interest in your alternative facts or your conspiracy theories. Wow, just think, this guy is a politician, and he doesn't seem to want to listen to the objections of the public. It's his way or the highway, it seems. I'm picking up a tone in this article. It seems like one of self-righteous indignation and a kind of hostility to people who want to have bodily autonomy. There's a real sense that he believes he's got the moral high ground here, and therefore, that's the end of the discussion as far as he's concerned. Your views are fortunately in the minority, and that's how they will be treated. Wait, I thought we cared about minorities. Huh, what do I know? Today's media landscape is such that you will probably receive attention for your ill-informed comments, but that doesn't mean you are right. It just means you have been noticed. And how do we know who's right and who's wrong here? Are we just expected to believe that your position is the correct one, and that's that? Sorry, mate, not a chance. But you've effectively argued for people who don't want to be vaccinated to be treated like second-class citizens in their own countries. For us to live in a free society, the rights of the individual must be protected, and it's extremely concerning that we're increasingly moving towards coercive tactics that prioritize the collective over the individual. Let's move on to yet more ridiculousness. This story is from Ireland, from the independent.ie. Pubs will be required to collect contact details for drinkers when they reopen on June 29th. Yep. All part of the new Orwellian contact tracing world we're now moving towards. As you know, in my previous video, I spoke about social distancing changes made to pubs in the UK that will no doubt make them unworkable and eventually result in their closure. Irish pubs seem to be in a similar situation. Pubs will have to collect the contact details of at least one person from every group of customers when they reopen on June 29th. After a day of intense negotiations, fresh guidelines are to be issued which will allow pubs which serve food operate with reduced social distancing guidelines. The Irish Independent revealed today that plans were afoot to allow pubs reduce social distancing to just 1 metre if they limit patrons to just 90 minutes inside their premises. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Just absolute insanity. If I told you this was going to happen a year ago, you'd have called me a nutbar conspiracy theorist. I despair for our society at this point. There's no credible science behind social distancing. That's the first thing. This is real, okay? 90-minute limits placed on patrons? You're on the clock as soon as you enter the pub? Wow. What a relaxed and friendly and spontaneous and fun atmosphere. And where did this arbitrary 90-minute limit come from? Maybe the virus is some kind of smart virus that will leave people alone for 90 minutes, but then at the 91-minute mark, it just goes postal again, right? That makes sense. I'm telling you, this is all about destroying people's happiness and robbing them of life's joys so that the vaccine can be offered by the government as the ultimate and only solution to all of this madness. How can people not see this? Apparently the virus can get you in the pub, right? But it doesn't affect you in the grocery store. You see the common thread here? Fun things like pubs and restaurants have to be made practically unworkable because fun is non-essential, but grocery stores where people need to get food, that's obviously essential. It's as if these rules were devised by an alien or an AI that cannot understand human beings and just sees us as robotic organisms, garbage in, garbage out.
The human requires nourishment. Humans don't necessarily need fun, love, compassion, empathy, socializing, community, or a meaningful life. What even are those things? Existing in your house is preferable to actually living a meaningful and authentic life. The government must be allowed to keep you safe from yourself. Other human beings carry disease. Stay away from others. Stay safe. Obey. Obey.
Just think about the idea of someone who has a few drinks on them, refusing to leave after the 90-minute mark. Right? Do they get kicked out by the bouncer? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the sight of a bouncer forcibly having to manhandle someone out of a pub because they stayed beyond the 90 minutes? Will pubs that don't enforce this rule be sanctioned in some way by the government? Imagine the tension of the modern Irish pub under these conditions. It'll be like walking on eggshells, or rather, arrows and social distancing circles. And this bullshit about 1 meter or 2 meters, this is all nonsense. I knew this was going to happen. The compromising. If you give tyrannical governments an inch, they'll take a mile. There is no compromise. None of this is necessary. Look, I'm sorry to all of the people out there who were fooled by this and who are still being fooled by this, and it's a hell of a lot of people. I'm sorry to all the people who don't seem to be able to think independently for themselves, and the television is doing all your thinking for you. You know, the people who wear masks in places where it's not mandatory. The sheep who think this virus is the Spanish flu. People who comment on Twitter with, we're in the middle of a pandemic here. But the reality is, as this Gript article explains, Ireland's death rate in April is lower than 2 years ago. Alright, if we're in the middle of a pandemic, we should be seeing epic levels of death. Despite what we're being told by the national broadcaster, RTE TV and others, it would appear there have been far fewer corona flu deaths than we have been led to believe, perhaps less than 200. According to the General Register's office, which records all deaths in Ireland, during April 2020, there were 2,689 deaths registered in Ireland. During April 2019, there were 2,599 deaths registered. During April 2018, there were 2,940 deaths registered. Hardly much of a difference from one year to another. A curious thing, considering there was meant to have been an avalanche of deaths in April. According to the health authorities, as of April 30th, there were 1,232 notified deaths due to corona. The implication being that an extra 1,232 people have died on top of all the other deaths that would have normally occurred anyhow. Which means there should have been a significant increase in registered deaths for the month of April. In stark contrast, there were far more deaths 2 years ago, 251 more. The death rate for March this year is also lower than last year. Also, most of the deaths that have occurred from COVID were in nursing homes, where it appears that elderly people were effectively euthanized, as Dr. Marcus de Bruin explained it. So hospital patients were transferred into care homes rather than sent home, and they were given no testing for COVID. Dr. de Bruin has covered this scandal in my interview with him. It's a must-watch. Irish people need a public inquiry into these deaths. It appears elderly, vulnerable people were transferred into care homes where COVID-19 was present in order to bump up the fatality numbers. Where's their protest march? Oh no, but the lefty lovies in Dublin marched for George Floyd in the US though. So let's get back to the independent.ie article on the pubs. The news was met with significant pushback from vintners who argued This was not enough time for people to enjoy a meal or watch a full soccer game. Who cares? This isn't about making sense or enjoyment. It's about making pubs and social settings unpleasant and unworkable so that they'll ultimately be forced out of business. It's about conditioning and brainwashing the populace into accepting a world where their every move and every social interaction is regulated, mediated, and controlled by physical distancing protocols, to acclimatize humanity into believing they need constant supervision like a child in a daycare center. Tonight, it has been confirmed that the time limit is to be revised by 15 minutes to 105 minutes after the lobbying of health chiefs by Fáilte Ireland. Wow, a whole 15 minutes! That ought to make a big difference to a night out. However, when patrons leave the pub or restaurant, the area they occupied must be left vacant for at least 15 minutes. This is to ensure that customers can leave and enter without mixing, and that staff have adequate time to give tables a thorough cleaning. Yeah, why would you want to mix in a pub, right? Of all places. I mean, heaven forfend there's a public venue left in our society where human beings can congregate freely and just enjoy each other's company and naturally meet new people completely uninhibited. Think about this for a second, dear viewer. We're now living in a time where the government can determine how many people are allowed to gather in a room together. This is the level of complete and utter tyranny we're living under. And people still think this is about a virus. This is about control over every aspect of people's lives. It's complete invasive overreach and surveillance. And what it's going to do to people is make them feel despondent and demoralized. So they'll simply not bother going to public settings. This is about obliterating every last ounce of joy and fun from our lives and taking the good out of everything, to keep people constantly in a state of fear, suspicion, uncertainty, high alert, and anxiety, that they won't feel comfortable or relaxed around each other. So the only place they'll feel safe is in their homes, where they're going to presumably spend more time on the internet. And that's likely what will happen. People won't go to the pubs or restaurants because what made them fun and indeed important places for people to gather will be destroyed. The pub has been a massive part of the social fabric of Irish society, and now it's about to end. So many people will just stay home and socialize online on Zoom or something, which is to say they're going to be drinking at home on their own. And maybe occasionally they'll invite friends over. But for the most part, you'll see more loneliness and atomization. Drinking at home alone is, of course, a recipe for alcoholism and depression anyway, as well as potential domestic abuse. But by making social settings and real-world communities virtually impossible, it will break the bonds of human connection and empathy, and it'll sow distrust and division between people. I believe these tactics to undermine our way of life is nothing more than divide and conquer. So let's move on. Health chiefs want pubs reopening on June 29th to operate like a restaurant, meaning everybody must be seated and offered table service. Meals could reasonably cost €9, must be sold to customer. I don't want a meal, I just want drinks. Alright, that's what a pub is for. So apparently we must be seated in the pub, no standing. Why? What is this? A workplace? A classroom? It's not supposed to be a restaurant. It's supposed to be a pub. People stand at the bar. Apparently you can't do that anymore. So anyway, no more dancing, I guess. No more natural, unrestricted interactions between people. Just endless rules and regulations. Corporate bureaucracy has now come to your social life. This sounds more like life under communism. Imagine current Karen culture now imported into pubs and bars. What could possibly go wrong? In order to operate under the reduced 1 meter rule, pubs and restaurants will also be required to collect the contact information of one person in every group who enters their business. Previously, the original HPSC guidance stated that this should be collected for the full group. Restaurants will also be told to reduce or stop the practice of allowing walk-ins. Instead, they must rely on pre-booking. Well, there's another barrier for entry. Okay? Yet more of the fun spontaneity of a night will be gone. Everything you do can be tracked and recorded, it seems. Just like with the idea of eventually introducing a cashless society so that all transactions are monitored and potentially blocked in some cases. This brave new world we're moving into is about the technocrats knowing everything you do, when and where you are at all times, and having a hand in shaping your behavior when you go to some places. The social distancing policies and guidelines, when implemented in practice, ensure that there's an invisible firewall between human beings, that they never fully feel comfortable around each other, that there's always a sense of tension, apprehension, uncertainty, a degree of doubt and suspicion, which is the perfect operating model for some kind of Maoist-style snitching culture. So let's take a look at the guidelines. The guidelines for pubs state, disposable or laminated menus that can be easily cleaned should be used. Single-use rather than shared condiments should be provided. Customers should be seated at a table except when using the toilet, paying and departing. Oh man, this really does feel like school. Do you have to put your hand up and go, on Will Cadogan, Dulgagian Letteris or something? My Irish subscribers know what that means. Regular announcements will be made to remind customers to follow social distancing advice and clean their hands regularly. Great. So now pubs are going to feel like the grocery store, where there will be regular nagging reminders to keep away from other people, stay safe, wash your hands. The long-term mental toll of this kind of insidious fear propaganda, it's yet to be truly understood. Smoking areas should have limited capacity. A strict queuing system should be in place for toilets to ensure physical distancing. Don't drink too much, especially if you have a small bladder, or you might have some trouble if there's a long, socially distanced queue to the bathroom. Straws should be individually wrapped. Decoration of drink glasses, e.g. cocktail umbrellas, should be minimized. Wow, cocktail umbrellas are a dangerous COVID risk. Who knew? That's the level of pettiness that we're at now. Details of one person from each group must be retained by the pub for 1 month. Carvery lunches are allowed, but must operate a one-way system. Yay, more herding of the public, like animals. So that's the end of pubs for me, okay? I won't ever be attending one so long as these rules are in place. And by the way, when these businesses go under and they're forced to close in order for the technocratic killjoys to rob us of another one of life's simple pleasures, I will find it hard to have sympathy for the pub industry. This is their own fault for complying with this crap and not standing up to the government. They're the ones who bought into the fear and the propaganda without question and never took the time to conduct the research for themselves. A lot of us have been doing the legwork. There's lots of scientists and independent journalists who've been digging into this and exposing this fraud. But just like with most people, if the information doesn't come from the HSE, RTE, or the government, it mustn't be true. Because the truth comes from the box in the corner of my living room, right? That's the attitude. The mainstream media, they would never lie to us, right? The publicans should have gotten together and formed a unified platform against these mandates. My sympathy is with the employees of the bars and the pubs and the restaurants, because massive layoffs are inevitable, and also the public, who will now lose another major social outlet. Social settings like these, to many people, they're coping mechanisms, right, that help people deal with the stresses and strains of life. Just blow off some steam, switch off, escape your worries, and lose yourselves in the moment. That's what they're supposed to be about. But just like whenever you switch on the television or the radio these days, the public are constantly being bombarded with endless reminders about COVID-19, and this constant reinforcement is now present in all aspects of life, including the grocery store, the shopping center, the pub, the school, the workplace. Human life now revolves around the virus and the ways in which our lives are modified to deal with it. The populace is gradually being broken and retrained like an animal in a cage to accept a new hyper-ordered way of behaving that makes them more compliant and accustomed to following rules without question. And by the way, I'm going to make this prediction now. When the so-called second wave emerges later this year, which will likely be yet more contrived data models and misleading death certification information, I bet that you're going to see people on social media saying things like, "We should never have opened up in the first place until the vaccine came along. This is madness. Shut it down forever." As expected, prices in pubs and restaurants are likely going to skyrocket in order to try to cope with the decreased number of customers they're now allowed to accommodate. So that's another nail in the coffin for these businesses. I suspect the same will go for the likes of things like cinemas. So I'll bring this video back to the beginning. This article is from the metro.co.uk. Matt Hancock hints coronavirus vaccine could be compulsory. The Health Secretary has said he hopes everyone in the country would be immunised against coronavirus if the UK develops a vaccine. Matt Hancock stopped short of confirming jab would be mandatory when asked at today's Downing Street press conference, but he didn't rule it out either. A working vaccination is yet to be developed anywhere in the world, but scientists at Oxford University and Imperial College London are locked in a race to make one. Yeah, I really trust that last company there. Speaking to reporters, the Health Secretary said, "The question of whether it's mandatory is not one that we've addressed yet. We are still some time off a vaccine being available. But I would hope, given the scale of this crisis and given the overwhelming need for us to get through this and to get the country back on its feet, the very positive impact that a vaccine would have, that everybody would have the vaccine." Yes, the idea of getting back to normal life will likely be sold to people with getting the vaccine, right? They'll associate those two things together. The controlled economic collapse that we're living through, which is being blamed on the virus, well, they'll claim that in order to return the economy and public life to normal, that the vaccine will be this wonderful cure-all. But of course, it's just snake oil. And just like how the media sneakily moved the goalposts from "we need to lock down till we flatten the curve," and then it was "we need to lock down till we get a vaccine," they'll likely just say that people who don't get the vaccine will simply lose more and more of whatever dwindling freedoms they have left at this point. I personally don't expect life to go back to normal until the public awaken to the reality of what's truly going on here. Things like Agenda 21. National coordinator of the UK's testing effort, Professor John Newton, said mandatory vaccinations are an option, but that hopefully it won't come to that, suggesting it could come to that. He added, the most successful vaccine programs tend to be via consent. So what really matters is clear explanation of the benefits and any risks associated with the vaccine, and a really good system to make the vaccine available to anybody who needs it. Although some countries have adopted mandatory programs, the most successful programs tend to be on the basis of consent, good information, and good delivery mechanisms. But clearly, mandation is there and can be used in some instances. Well, that's comforting to know. And on that optimistic note, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to share it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.